Um, we are going to start this series called Shaarei Halachah, a summary of the laws for Jewish living. Obviously, the author is covering a series of information, including dietary laws, bar mitzvah, prayers, and many other areas of Jewish law. For those of you who are basically wanting to go through a conversion process that's recognized by a local Beit Din, one of the books that they have on the list that must be studied is this book of Rabbi Zev Greenwald, Shaarei Halachah, a summary of the laws for Jewish living. Now, one of my purposes of doing this series is obviously to make it possible for you, the viewer, to be able to learn what's necessary so you can go before a Beit Din and be able to process your conversion. Obviously, in many places, they charge handsomely to sit down with someone, with a mentor, with a rabbi, to be able to learn the materials in the book, much of which is very easily readable just by buying the book and going forward. In this first shiur, or your study, we're going to look at the daily routines, and that you'll find in the book also. So what we're going to try to do, we're not going to stray away from the book. I may add some things that perhaps you, the viewer, are not aware of. Like, for example, the washing of the hands. There are other customs. This book is primarily directed towards fulfilling the Ashkenazim customs for conversion, or at least halakha. Yes, it's based upon the Shulchan Aruch, but it is based on the interpretation as the Ramah and the Ashkenazic poskim have interpreted. Now, if you wanted to get something more for Sephardim, I would definitely recommend the Shulchan Aruch Yakut Yosef, which covers everything that this book covers, but for Sephardim. In the first part of the daily routine, this book is going to be covering 1, when you get up in the morning; number 2, the introduction up to prayer; number 3, the Birkat Hasha'ah, the morning blessing; number 4 is going to deal also with the preparation for the morning and afternoon prayers in the minyan in the synagogue, certain procedures and certain levels of holiness and the way we should proceed and treat the synagogue, the sanctity, as it were, of the synagogue. And on Chapter 5, they'll be dealing with the mitzvah of tzitzits. I mean, should we keep them in? Should we keep them out? According to the Ashkenaz customs, they keep them out. There are different, customs, and I will be going back and forth with this, because you will see there are different applications depending on which customs you're going to go through. You have also in Chapter 6, the tefillin, or the phylacteries. Chapter 7, shacharit, the morning prayers. And then Chapter 8, we're going to look at the afternoon prayers. Chapter 9, Ma'ariv, or the evening prayers, and all of its part. And this is the first part, and the book, it has several parts in it, but this is the first part that we're going to be focusing on our videos and lectures. So there's going to be a lot of videos based on the same title. I'm going to have it listed here on this website under the area of Shaarei Halachah. That way, which means the gates of Halachah, the gates of Jewish law. Now, we're going to look at the first part, which is arising in the morning. We're going to look at the Modeh Ani in the morning. What do we do when we get up in the morning? And it's very good that you read the daily routine, because the Jew, very moment from he wakes up, he goes to sleep, we have God before us. And the prayer for Modeh Ani upon arising in the morning means that we thank God through the prayer of Shema before retiring at night. These commandments or mitzvahs are discussed in these chapters, and it's very important that you follow along by acquiring this book for yourself. This becomes a very important part of the learning session, so that you know where we're at what point. If there's any questions regarding any of the materials, you're welcome to send me an email to Rabbi Otero, that's Rabbi Otero, O-T-E-R-O, at yahoo.com. Now, obviously, every local rabbi has their particular customs, as it were, or the way they learned it, And I would encourage you that if you are now attending a synagogue here in the United States, that you would ask your local rabbi exactly what is their custom, so you blend into the community. Now, the Shulchan Aruch elaborates on the passage, "I have set the Lord before me always," as a fundamental concept of the Torah. It is among the virtues of the righteous one who walks before God. And when a man is alone, he sits, moves, and behaves differently than he would sit, move, or behave if he were, you might say, before a great king. How much more so that we learn? How much more so that we learn when we realize that when we get up in the morning, we are before the Almighty, even though sometimes we're not cognizant of it. And so how much more will we act differently when we realize on the conscientious level that we're before the Almighty God? Most people would act differently if they were aware at every second of their life that God was before them. The way they would speak, the way they would think, the way they would act, the way they even would deal with others would be completely different. But it's because of this lack of awareness that we begin to disconnect ourselves from that which God would require of us on an individual level. And it says very clearly, how much more so will his conduct be different when he realizes that he's before the Almighty King, the Holy One, blessed be he, who fills the world, who is looking down upon him and watching him. This is exactly what it says in Mishle. Mishle says basically to recognize in all your path the Lord, and he will guide your path. He will guide your direction. You'll see that in Proverbs chapter 3. Now, interesting enough, says, can anyone conceal himself in a secret place so that God cannot see him? Says the Lord. That I cannot see him? Says the Lord. That's in Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu 23:24. If a man acquires this attitude, he will be filled with fear of God and piety, and he will be humble before God at that time. This according to the Orach Chaim in chapter 1, verse 1. Now, I want you to hear this because this becomes the very essence of how to live a Jewish life. It is to be imbued by the fear of God from the very moment you wake up, from the very moment you interact with others, the moment when you basically even use the bathroom. And we are going to look at our behavior as we go into the bathroom. Well, many of you will probably be laughing, saying, well, what do you mean, the bathroom? Yeah, even in the bathroom. Even the way you wipe yourself, even the way you wash your hands. All of this takes place in this minutia of detailedness. We serve God in these ways. Rabbi Joseph Caro, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, opens a section of the Orach Chaim with the words, one should be strong like a lion to rise in the morning to serve his Creator. Now, I don't know about you, but I know for myself, I have always a struggle waking up in the morning. My clock is not a morning clock. My clock is an evening clock. You could see me awake late at night till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then to get up in the morning, it's a struggle. So every time I read this, I think about that. I got to wake up like a lion, but I go to sleep not like a lion, but rather something else. I won't go into that. But for the moment he rises in the morning, a Jew is at his Creator's service, ready and faithful to observe all of his mitzvahs, it says here, all of his commandments. Now, the observing of the mitzvahs in the rising in the morning basically announces his entry unto the very service of God. That means when you wake up, you're not waking up for yourself. You're waking up with the first thing that comes out of your lips is Modeh Ani. I thank you, Lord. You brought back to me my soul. You have imbued into me which is holy and pure. God's giving you another chance of life. What a beautiful thing to be able to realize this. God gives you another chance of life, and here and the now. And one should make every effort to arise early enough to recite the morning prayers with the congregation in the synagogue. They should make every effort. There are obvious obstacles many times of this becoming a reality. But that's the effort that we should all make. Fortunately, there are different morning times in which there are prayers. Sometimes they wake up just at the break of dawn, and you'll have them at 6 o'clock in the morning, some at 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and some of the other synagogues who happens to go all the way to 10 o'clock in the morning, evening synagogues. Well, we go into the reciting of Modeh Ani. When we sleep, we entrust God with our souls, And God in His kindness restores our soul to us in the morning, leaving us feeling rested and refreshed. Therefore, when a Jew wakes up in the morning, he thanks his Creator by reciting, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. Therefore, when a Jew wakes up, he thanks his Creator by reciting, I thank you, O living God, the eternal King, that you have returned my soul to me with compassion. Everything that God does is with compassion. I like that word, compassion, because it has the idea of passion from within. God does it to us. He shows His mercy because He loves to show mercy to us. Can you imagine if we looked at the world that way? To be able to go out in the morning with that act of kindness, of mercy towards one another. This is exactly what God does. Your trustworthiness is great. Now that word trustworthiness in Hebrew is emunatecha. And that emunatecha means that He's faithful, He's true, He's committed to you. He is committed to us to show His kindness every morning. Wouldn't that call or beckon for us to call that we should be at least a little kesat of emunatecha to Hashem? Obviously so. One should pause slightly between the words of behemla, with compassion, and rabba. Obviously, one of the things that we learn by the Rambam is that although you'll read a lot of this about in Hebrew in prayer, one of the things most people don't talk about is what is important as you begin your walk in the Jewish faith is to know what you're saying. Many times we want to just start reading and saying all the blessings in Hebrew, not knowing that it is more important that you know what you're saying than what you're saying in Hebrew and don't know what it means. So, we go back and we take 3 steps back, as it were, to understand the importance that what you utter with your mouth, you understand what you're saying. So what use is it of anyone if anyone starts saying Baruch Atah and they don't even know what Baruch Atah means? So blessed are you. What does that mean? So we're going to go into it, the importance of you learning what you're saying. Because if you don't know what you're saying, really it's of no real meaning. It's like speaking in tongues, in a language that's completely unknown to you. And what we read in Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 19, that the nations will be converted to a pure tongue. And there is a real question whether that means that the world in its entirety will be speaking Hebrew, or merely that the world in its way of speaking will be pure in a pure manner. So there are different ways of looking at that passage, but the verse they tell us very important that we should understand what we learn. Interesting enough, some years back when many Jews had been driven to exile, and every year they would come and gather to Jerusalem, many Jews had lost the holy language. They had lost how to pray in the holy language. Obviously, since Yehuda HaHasid brought back the concept of praying in the Hebrew language, and Hebrew is now so vast in the Jewish world, even non-speaking Jews have access to it by transliteration. Nevertheless, it should be known, it is not a requirement to speak and read in Hebrew in order for God to answer your prayers or to be able to participate in prayer in a congregation. This whole entire chasm that took place between the conservative, Reform, and Orthodox had to do exactly as a part to distinguish themselves from the rest. And so the Orthodox community resisted the efforts to allow the community to pray in English or in Spanish or whatever language, to actually even lead the prayers before the Bima. So what the Orthodox community did was to insist you must learn Hebrew and you must know what you're saying in Hebrew when you go before the Bima to pray on behalf of the entire congregation. Of course, this was truly an innovation to bring people back to a more, you might say, uniform way of prayer, utilizing the Hebrew language, which is the language of the Lashon HaKodesh of our people. But I want to let you know that all of a sudden there are 10 Jewish men, and one is of an incredible character, moral character. He doesn't know how to speak Hebrew. You can have him lead and be the Baal Tefillah. There's no problem to that. The Rambam speaks of this. Obviously, if you have someone who does know how to read Hebrew, let him do that and go forward. But then the problem arises that the rest of the people, unless they have a translation, doesn't know what he is saying and cannot really honestly answer amen to his blessing when the rest of the people don't know Hebrew. And this becomes a major problem in a lot of new communities that are arising from literal nothingness. Now, and I say this because a lot of people are unaware of what the Rambam says regarding that. Now, when we go into this aspect, we know also the first thing we do is when we wake up in the morning is obviously wash our hands. Now, after washing the hands, awakening, children also observe this called netilat yadayim, or among the Ashkenaz, netilas yadayim. So basically what they'll have a little container next to their bed with a bowl, as it were. So as soon as they get up in the morning, they wash their hands before getting out of bed. Now, among the Sephardim, we understand that that becomes a big problem because obviously you can still walk out of your bed and go to the bathroom and actually wash your hands. So how do we overcome that problem? Very simple. We're in a blanket. We basically scrub our hands in the morning with the blanket, and we get out of our bed and we go into the bathroom with no problem and do washing of our hands there. So for those of you who say, well, this is a big problem, you have to do it this way and go from there. And so this is one of the things that we're going to do here. Now, therefore, one should try to arrange having the water done to where he sleeps so that he will not have to walk more than 4 amos and being able to wash the hands. Again, as I mentioned before earlier, this is according to the Ashkenazic minhag. One should not touch their bodily orifices, such as the mouth, eyes, nose, ears, before performing netilat yadayim. Similarly, one should not touch any food before performing netilat yadayim. Now, all of this is applicable, again, in a general sense, and as I mentioned, the Sephardic custom is to basically be able to rub your hands with a blanket or a towel or some other apparatus, so that way you can get up out of the bed and be able to do what is necessary, the necessity, and wash your hands afterwards. Because after you utilize the bathroom, obviously you utilize it and you have to wash again for having utilized the restroom. So here we go into some more details as to what is the usual likelihood of most people to be able to move forward. Now, several reasons for the netilat yadayim are cited as in literature, in Jewish literature. In the temple period, the Kohanim would sanctify their hands by washing them before beginning the sacrificial service. When we rise in the morning, it is as if we were created anew and are about to begin serving our Creator. Therefore, we wash our hands, we recite the blessings, netilat yadayim, at the start of the service, or the start of the day, before we begin performing the commandments, the mitzvot. And that word mitzvot, very interesting enough, it's a word that's a combined word which means to connect with the one who commands, or tzvot means to connect, a connection. So when the person is doing a commandment that God has instructed the person, be it Jewish or not Jewish, he is connecting with God. Another reason for netilat yadayim is that while we're sleeping, one's hands might also be in different parts of the body and render it impure or unclean. Now, interesting enough, the Rambam goes into this a little bit regarding the cleaning, because if we only wash our hands because of impurity, the question then becomes, are we now in a state of impurity? So we're going to look at different perceptions of what was considered being impure and pure. In such a case, one is required to wash his hands before praying. Our sages ordained that we wash our hands upon arising, and because of these reasons, we recite the blessings of having washed our hands. So now we have 2 points here. One rising when we get up in the morning, and one before we go into prayer. This is why most synagogues should have or have a place to wash your hands before you go into the synagogue proper and don your talit, your prayer shawl, and your tefillin, your phylacteries. A spiritual impurity rests on a person after he has slept. Now it's removed by pouring water 3 times. Now this aspect of impurity, according to the Rambam, is no longer applicable because of the fact that this impurity that used to be is no longer present. We don't even know that they call it a tuma, a spirit of impurity that would rest on the fingertip. So as the tradition continued, this practice continued because of that. But I do recommend you read the Rambam on this because it's something that would be of interest for those of you that there's a question regarding this. And Rabbi Mark Angel talks about this also in some of his commentaries. Now, how should one perform Netilat Yadayim? One will take a vessel with water in his right hand and pass it to his left hand. Okay, and then to wash his right hand first. How would he do that? He would do it 3 times. 1, right, left, right, left, right, and left. Now some people wash their hands 4 times, but it's preferable to wash the hands up to the wrist, up to your wrist. So if it's only just covering the fingers, they're not fulfilled. Should cover all the way to the wrist of your hands. This way is completely enmeshed, as it were, with water. It's preferable to use an uncracked utensil. Netilat Yadayim, at least 4 ounces of reveal water must be used. The exact measure of reveal, we'll look at it later in chapter 15. Now, the water used for Netilat Yadayim may not be used for any other purpose, nor may it be walked upon. In other words, it's considered, once you rinse it, you wash it, it is considered also not pure. Therefore, it should be spilled out in a place where people do not walk. It should be picked up and not touched. Here's some additional halachah. If one has a limited amount of water, he may wash his finger until the knuckles 3 times. This is a shortcut. If no water is available, what should he do? He should clean his hands, the palms of his back of his hand, all sides of his fingers, by rubbing them on anything clean, garment, earth. In this case, it's recited the Nekiyot Yadayim instead of a Netilat Yadayim. This is what we do, the Sephardims do, in the morning in order to be able to then properly wash. Now, even though his hands were not washed, one may recite blessings and study Torah. Later, the water is available, he should wash his hands 3 times. Now, when one rises after having taken a nap during the day, he should wash his hands 3 times without reciting a blessing. Why? Because there's a question of doubt whether he was in a full sleep or coming back. Now, we'll take a look at that a little bit further in chapter 3 of the book. It's also commendable to rinse one's mouth every morning, and so one will pronounce God's name in prayer and blessing and clean one's mouth, and there's your toothbrush, clean it all out. On fast days, one should not rinse one's mouth. Now, here's some other occasion on when we must wash our hands. There are other times during the course of the day, that one must wash his hands. This includes when leaving the bathroom without having relieved oneself, or even having bathed, after a haircut, having shaved, having cut one's nails, after visiting a cemetery or attending a funeral. It's not customary to enter after leaving the cemetery or attending a funeral without washing the hands. And in each of the above cases, we read that we must wash our hands. Also, one should also wash his hands after scratching his scalp, touching his shoes, definitely touching his feet, parts of his body that are normally required to be covered. Now, covering one's head, which becomes a sign of respect for the divine presence. Now, every man should wear a covering over their head, and this is a custom of the sages. And let me say this, You will not find that it is necessarily called a halachah. It is a custom. The Talmud teaches in Shabbat 156b that covering one's head imbues a man with fear of God and humility and helps him improve his character traits. It's virtuous to have one's head covered while sleeping. It doesn't say it's mandatory. Okay, it does not say it's mandatory. And I need to point this because, again, many times we have the tendencies when we read these books on Jewish law, we take that which is considered a suggestion and we turn that into a law. It does not say it's mandatory. As a matter of fact, the only proper time in which a covering must be placed is when a blessing is to be issued, or even when you enter into a Beit Knesset to pray. The yarmulke was there indicated as a sign, as it says, an indication of having some yirat shamayim, having some divine respect. Okay? In the society in which we live, in which the boldness in the business world, in the world in which is very, very bold, and there is no respect of God, and many times the pressure of society creates the inability to be able to wear a covering. In such cases, it is not even a requirement for a Jew to walk about with a yarmulke, especially if his life is in danger. Now, I'm saying this in particular because we have seen many people attacked in France, in Europe, only for the mere fact of having a yarmulke. There are other ways to cover your head without utilizing a yarmulke. Okay, and that is a hat, a cap, and even one of those French hats. Okay, and these are all ways of covering the hat, oneself. Interesting enough that even those who basically, you might say, are against us, those members of the Islamic rule, they too wear a cap, because this was a kippah of a sort, because they realize that the covering of the head is in fact a sign of respect to God. Even the Pope, when he does his service, covers his head with a kippah, a covering. So how much more the people who are considered and called the chosen of God, God's people, are we required on a very personal level to show some respect, to show some respect for the presence of God. Now, getting dressed, the prophet Micah called out to Israel, walk modestly with your God. That's in Micah 6:8. All aspects of a Jew's behavior should be unobtrusive. Modesty or sniut, unobtrusive behavior and dress, and busha is a sign of shame and impropriety, are exalted virtues which draws a person close to Torah. By no means does sniut automatically mean you have to dress like you're black and white, like you're in a pleasant town, Pleasantville society. Those who have read many of my comments, and also Rabbi Mark Angel's statements about the whole new religious uniform, realized completely that this was something that was imposed upon Jews during the shtetl, during the programs, during the time that they wanted to make the Jews completely different and force them to wear the black and white uniform, which now they have taken, as it were, with great pride. But there is no basis to say that just because you wear something more colorful, it's not modest. And this is a big issue that now ensues throughout the religious world, that if you don't have a black hat, and I do have a black hat hanging around, then you're not religious. I do have my black coat and pants, to such an extent that even Sephardic rabbis, when they're in front of the more Ashkenazic or Haredi or black hatters, they feel intimidated because they do not usurp, that they don't present themselves of their unique position within Judaism. Keep in mind, most Jewry are now following through the customs of the Ashkenazi community because of so much pressure that was imposed even to the Sephardim. Sephardim used to dress as very, very alive, beautiful colors. Now, the right side of the garment should be put first, since the Torah ascribes the more importance of the right side to the left. However, when tying the knot, the left side precedes the right, because of the tefillin are bound to the left arm. Therefore, shoes should be put on the following manner. First, the right shoe should be put on, then the left shoe, then the left shoelaces are tied, then the right shoelaces are tied. When taking off shoes, one should begin with the left shoe, since removing the left shoe first demonstrates the importance of the right side. Similarly, when washing oneself, the right side should precede the left. When bathing the whole body, a person should first wash his head, since it is the most important part of the body. The mitzvah not to adopt the practice of the Gentiles now becomes incumbent. And this is going to be a very important part, because we are forbidden to imitate the dress or behavior of other people. This is derived from the verse, "And you shall not follow the practices of the Gentiles," as found in Leviticus 20, verse 23. "And do not follow after their practices." These verses becomes a major issue point, as it were, among the religious communities that attempt to create, as it were, a difference. So my question on this, to many of those, that when the non-Jewish community began to be more modest, so how will that affect then the religious community? Does that mean that they will now become not as modest as they? Now, there are situations in which we differentiate ourselves by behaving and dressing accordingly. And these practices of the Gentiles, by and large, in today's fashion world, are mainly shaped by and from Jewish designers, which creates a major problem to this passage. Because if, in fact, we are not to follow the practices of the Gentiles, but these practices are being promoted and created by Jewish designers and the fashion designers, then whose design and practices are we then thus following? Point in case, most shirts made by men used to have 4 corners, which requires the sitsits of the corners to be placed. Nowadays, because of the Jewish designers, they recreated this shirt so it has, as it were, a U form to it, so no longer requiring the 4 sitsits on the garment. That now has made its way into the Gentile fashion world, which is now what they have adopted to be there at all times. So again, I beg the question, what does this really mean? And of course, you're going to have different opinions, and of course, going to the extreme of the opposite direction is what has been the custom of many Shaarei religious Jews, to try to shun and be completely different, to the point that they look like people from Pleasant Town or Pleasantville, if you've seen the movie. So this, I don't think, is what it means in Leviticus and Vayikra. To follow their practices means their practices, it means their way of dress. God bestowed and exalted spiritual mission upon the Jewish people, not only as we draw closer to the Almighty and His 613 commandments, to be a guiding light, a spiritual inspiration to all nations. Because of our spiritual merit and calling, we must not let ourselves be lured, says Rabbi Greenwald, to the Gentile practices. Problem, Rabbi Greenwald, you're wearing black. That uniform of the black wear was created by the Gentile practices of old. So the fact that you're wearing black coat, black hat, is in fact a practice of the Gentiles of that time. So what are we to say? Let's take the black off. This is what I'm saying, to use a little bit of common sense when we're dealing with Halachah. Because no one can say, in fact, that these black wear uniforms that we see through the cities of Miami Beach and New York City was something that was handed down by Moshe Rabbeinu. Just the opposite. It was handed down by the European anti-Semitic communities, imposing them a particular wear very similar to the priests of the Christian and other religions. They wanted to identify them as the black and white, chosen. So why don't we change our wear? Why not put, say, a nice dark blue uniform? See, this is where we're talking about how easily even Judaism could be hijacked. Now, the refinement we seek for our characters promoted through modest, inconspicuous clothing and praiseworthy behavior. Therefore, our mode of dress should be without overtone and of conceit, of immodesty, which also applies to the way one wears one's hair, one's manner of speech, and general conduct. A Jew should conduct himself in all of his affairs in a way that demonstrates that he is a member of God's people, who faithfully strives to fulfill the Creator's will. Now, regarding the details of this, you can look at Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Deah 178. I'm going to stop here because we're going to go into, in our next series, the Introduction to Prayer. So this becomes a very important part. And I want to invite you again, those of you, to continue in this series of Shaarei Halachah, a summary of the laws for Jewish living. Shalom, shalom.